Hey everyone, the name is Erik Thor and welcome to today's live stream where we will be talking about Carl Jung. Carl Jung's personality type, his personality, his psychology, his mental frame, his thoughts, and his opinions, you could say, on typology, the cognitive functions, and MBTI. So let's start out with the understanding the fact that, it's a fragile system, a fragile setup. So what you have to understand about Carl Jung is that he only conceptualized the cognitive functions. He did not conceptualize the 16 MBTI types. Those came later. That was not his contribution to personality psychology. That came from the Myers-Briggs type indicator from Isabella Briggs. And so it makes sense then that it's hard to type Carl Jung and it's hard to know what type he read himself as. We can only read what cognitive functions he identified with. And you know, Carl Jung was interviewed on his own cognitive functions. He was interviewed on his own mental frame. He kept plenty of notebooks and he did plenty of introspection. He thought a lot about himself, who he was. He tried very hard to understand himself. So we do have quite a lot of evidence to go on. And if we go only by his own words, Carl Jung spoke of having two strong cognitive functions: introverted intuition and introverted thinking. He said in an interview that he related the strongest to introverted intuition and to introverted thinking. Now, the traditional MBTI observer here might say that makes the option easy. He must be an INFJ. But others assume that maybe the order was different. Maybe he was an ISTP. And others assume that no, he was wrong. He was clearly an INTP. And then some, and quite a few, I would say at that, believe, yeah, he was wrong. He's an INTJ. But I must say, then our view of Carl Jung is very simplistic, and our view and interpretation of his thoughts is very shallow. When Carl Jung conceptualized the cognitive functions, he had his own ideas about their meaning. Different ideas, I would say, than what Myers-Briggs type indicator thinks today. His own ideas and definitions of introverted intuition differ greatly from the Myers-Briggs type indicator's view on the matter. What Carl Jung saw as introverted intuition was really just having an internal, abstract state of mind. He focused on the introverted and intuitive in a person. He focused on the ideas and the thoughts and the abstractions that came from inside, not from the world around us. His thoughts on extroverted intuition was that its focus was on patterns and opportunities and chasing patterns, gathering and making connections. His thoughts on introverted intuition was that it had to do with inner patterns, inner concepts, inner thoughts and ideas, and thoughts that came from almost out of nowhere. So you could say the insight or the theory. So this is not too controversial. His thoughts on introverted thinking, however, and his thoughts on introverted feeling, they are perhaps the most revealing of all his definitions on the cognitive functions. His thoughts on introverted thinking were that introverted thinking was basically introverted ideas. It was a thinking or a style of thinking or working of the mind that was purely internal. It was a thinking that was based on its own logic, its own rational, subjective version of logic. He thought that the introverted thinking type was the person that could conceptualize and come up with its own logic and rational reasoning for how the world should work and how it should operate. With that definition in mind, it's not easy to say that he was, say, an INTP. Just because he identified with it, just because he said he identifies with introverted thinking, does not mean he would necessarily identify with being an INTP. He might not at all share the thinking and perceiving types' interest in reactive logic and in adaptive problem solving, looking at problems around him, seeing how to best fix it and arrange it and customize it. He might not think that way at all. He might just be describing what he experienced as an introvert. He might just be saying that maybe my mind, my mental frame, my values are more rational in their nature, more based on what feels or felt to me logical, what felt to me smart, and a proper way to arrange things. So I believe Carl Jung had a very special way of seeing the cognitive functions, a very different way of seeing it. The Myers-Briggs type indicator thought that you had a dominant function that was introverted and an auxiliary function that was extroverted. Carl Jung may have actually believed that we had two cognitive functions in our top and that they were both introverted. If you look at his own reasoning about himself, he did not relate to any of the extroverted functions. He related only to two cognitive functions, introverted intuition and introverted thinking. Those were what he thought were strongest in him. So he only related to two introverted functions. And he did not say which one he thought necessarily was higher. He only perhaps hinted at it. He thought, and this is my interpretation, that his two top functions were introverted, where we think today that our two top functions are introverted and extroverted. So then the question is, was he a looping INFJ like Kashyap says in the comment fields? Was he an INFJ that had, due to some anomaly or to some trauma or to some bad experience, came to overdevelop his introverted thinking more so than what was healthy? And I think if you look at and study his views on introverted feeling, then you might get an idea about this, an answer to this. His view of introverted feeling was very, very harsh. You could tell that he struggled a lot with introverted feeling. He thought it was wild, unpredictable. He thought it was something, in many ways, strange and peculiar and female and womanly and irrational. He struggled with it. He struggled with things that were not rational in their nature. He much preferred things that were rational. And you would think, is this an INFJ? Are INFJs people that have a problem with introverted feeling? Or do INFJs feel bad about introverted feeling? Do we think it's something inferior, something subpar, something irrational? No, we do not. INFJs do not have these negative opinions on introverted feeling. Typically, INFJs have quite a positive stance on introverted feeling. We see it as something we want to nurture and support and something that is important and valuable. We see it as something we want to help and work with and deal with and respond to. So, for me, it's hard to see why Carl Jung would be an INFJ. For me, it's much easier to think that there are only two options here. That Carl Jung was either an INTJ or an INTP. The only two functions, the only two types that I can see that have a strong preference for introverted intuition and introverted thinking are INTJs and INTPs. Only those two types have a very strong preference for introverted thinking and introverted intuition. And let me tell you something, INFJs do not have a strong preference for introverted thinking. We use it, yes, but do we idealize it? Do we hype it to the skies? Do we see it as something valuable in itself? No, at most we see it as a necessity to an end. We accept that, yeah, we have to put on and think about things rationally. We have to be smart about things. We have to be reasonable about things. We have to think critically about things. But it's not something we enjoy. It's not something we like. It's not something we think will solve the problems of the world or make the world a better place. And I don't think him being an Enneagram 5 would make him appear more like an introverted thinker. The Enneagram 5 is a type that values thinking about change. The Enneagram 5 is always thinking about new possibilities. What if that? Or what if that? Or what if that? The Enneagram 5 is just anybody that can do these things. And Enneagram 5 is always questioning things. Why did that happen? What could happen next? What could that mean? It's always studying everything that's happening around it. It's got the mind of a sage or somebody who is insatiably curious but prefers to think about the world than to act in it. And yeah, Carl Jung was perhaps one of those types. He was perhaps an Enneagram 5. But I don't see an INFJ 5 necessarily being more of an introverted thinker. So the other question, the other issue people have is, how can an INTJ dabble in the occult? How can somebody with strong extroverted thinking or TJ dabble in the occult? How can he write books on tarot and psychology and spirituality? Why would an INTJ ever be interested in such a thing? Well, as I've said in many videos before, I don't believe thinkers are necessarily more or less interested in spirituality. I believe thinkers can have just an equal fascination in spirituality as an INFJ. And there are INFJs out there, such as myself, that have less of an interest in spirituality. Some INFJs believe that there are spiritual explanations to how the world works. Some INFJs do not. Some INTJs believe that there are spiritual explanations to the world, like tarot or energies or shis or chakras. And some INTJs do not. I've encountered several INTJs that had a fascination with spirituality, but they sought to devise systems for explaining spirituality. They came up with systems and methods, and they designed these systems. They came up with definitions. They formalized it. They create the structures and parameters and rules for it and how to think about it. And another thing that made me think, no, Carl Jung cannot be an INFJ, was that he did not enjoy building community. One of the things I see in all FJs is a love for building community. Feeling judging types, they love to connect people, build relationships, make people get along together, create circles around them, to bring people together to say, hey, everybody, have you met Carl? Have you met Yes? Have you spoken to each other? Did you know that Yes also likes soccer? Did you know that you also have a shared similarity or interest with this guy? One second. No, what I saw as Carl Jung's primary fascination was building the system itself, improving on the system, learning more about the system, thinking deeper about the system, criticizing the system, working on the system, perfecting the system. He was a system builder. He was a system designer. He was an architect of typology. And he was not a diplomat of typology. He was not the spokesperson or the communicator of typology. He was not the person that brought people together and created circles to understand each other's true typology. But he was the person that set the framework for typology. And I believe people that set frameworks, create systems, devise methods for typing, helping each other, supporting each other, working with systems, I believe those people are thinking and judging personality types. So what would you say Carl Jung's Enneagram type and tri-type is, Erik? Well, I believe what we can see with Carl Jung is definitely an open and a mindset that is intuitive, loves new ideas, loves thinking about new possibilities. He definitely had a curious personality. And I don't think, I think he was a person that challenged the traditional in many ways, and what we thought and what we used to believe about the mind. I do think he was more of a thinker than a doer. I think he loved that of spending his life in front of books, researching, studying, thinking about things. But I do think he struggled to ever make those things practical or to work with those things in his real life. And I think that was very difficult for him. I think the thought of going out and doing something was very difficult to him. That suggests he must be an Enneagram 5. Then I believe it's only fair to assume that he must be a self-preserving type. Not a sexual type, not a social type, but a self-preserving type. A person focused on creating change and changing the world through his ideas. Then I do believe he must have been an Enneagram 1 type. I do believe he was more competitive. So either an Enneagram 1 or an Enneagram 8. And I do believe that that means he must be either a 3 or a 4, and most likely a 4. A 5-4-1 personality type. Four, because he created something of original value. He did not exceed by becoming the best in a discipline of psychology by simply studying other people, how they did it, and mastering it and becoming better at it than everybody else. He found his own way. He created his own way. He wanted to succeed through his own creativity. Hey, Peter. And he had a one nature of constantly working to perfect and improve on and go deeper into and think more about it and study it better and learn more about it and think about it again and then again and then again. And I don't think he could ever settle his mind. I don't think his mind was a mind that could ever settle. And that's, I think, why we never got any clear devised theories from him. He could never settle. He could never say this is that and that is that. He could only say, I think this is that and I think that is that. And that's a sign of open mind he had. So in conclusion, I think the most likely is Carl Jung was an INTJ. Second possibility, INTP. Third possibility, INFJ. I think all other possibilities, unlikely. So an INTJ 154 or 514 or 415. What do you guys think? What do you think Carl Jung's type was, and why? Feel free to read up on his theories on the cognitive functions, see how it all began, see how it all came together. And yeah, when you try to type Carl Jung, you understand also how difficult it is to type celebrities. Thanks everybody for joining up, and if you like this video, leave a like, share, subscribe, or comment down below. Thanks for watching, and see you guys later.